Welcome to Living Outside the Matrix, the show where we discuss important issues, either ignored or misrepresented by the mainstream narrative. Hi there, I'm your host, Nigel Howitt, and on the show today, it's a great pleasure to be joined by a man called Adrian. And I use that introduction specifically because I know Adrian understands the basic principles of the common law and his standing as a man as opposed to a citizen. So, Adrian, thank you for taking the time to join us today, and warm welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for asking me to come on. I'm a big fan of your work. I've been for quite a long time now.
Oh, thank you so much, man, and likewise.
Thank you.
Adrian, so yeah, where should we start? There's so many things to talk about.
It's your show. You lead the way.
My prerogative. I want to quiz you about your book. The Alternative Principles for Health.
Yeah.
And I thought maybe we could try and wrap that in an overall discussion about the general sort of political situation. Of course, this whole arrival of sort of communism, not sort of, but communism in the United Kingdom here. And also, the whole concept of freedom. Where's this going? Is it there are some people that are quite pessimistic. There are other people who think that it's all going to be gone as soon as the lockdown's lifted. So I'm keen to canvass all of your thoughts on all these issues. So to start with, I want to start you really with how you got into the health thing, because health is such an important component, especially these days with this coronavirus stuff going on. Everyone's paranoid about their health.
Yeah.
But you and I have followed a fairly similar path of self-discovery and self-education. So can you tell us a little bit about your way in?
Yeah, I mean, I won't give you the whole story because it's quite long and involved. And if people wanted to find out a little bit more about that, they can visit where the book is, which is on Alternative Principles for Health Info. I really should have come up with an easier title of that. I never started out to write a book. That was never my intention, and it still isn't my intention. If you go back, I wasn't that well as a youngster. Things used to happen in my health, and I never really could figure out why. I'd go and see the doctor, go and see the dentist, and I didn't realize at the time that they were actually part of the problem, that and nutrition and exposure to toxins via stuff my parents had around the house that they weren't aware of either. And if you roll forward then to about 18 years ago, I watched the medical industry have a very large hand in the death of my mother from brain cancer. It took her 10 years to die, and I watched them do all their things that she went along with and I went along with, thinking, yeah, they're the guys, they've got the coats, they've done all the study and everything. And it was towards the end I started to work out that actually that was largely killing her. I mean, she'd had a lot of health issues during her life, which, looking back with the knowledge I have now, and I was paying attention to that, looking at that, and I'd already taken some steps in my own health. I'd gone pretty much vegan by that point to explore that and see how that worked out. And that really had some tremendous benefits for me in terms of clearing up some health issues. And then after she died, a couple of things happened in one of my businesses. I got divorced in the middle of that, and I had a breakdown. My mind went. On the outside, everything looked fine, but on the inside, it was just a big, dark, nasty hole, which is when I turned to drinking and puffing on the other stuff as medicine to try and keep my head together. But all during that time, I kept asking questions about, why do we get sick? And if you then roll forward to probably, I think it was about 7 years ago, 7 years ago, I think. My partner, who's just wonderful, she developed breast cancer. And I thought, really, for selfish reasons, for me, I can't go through this again and watch someone else I really care about die. And also for her, I didn't want her to have to go through it either. So I looked at all the knowledge again and went back through everything in that. And she obviously stepped her game up a lot as well. And we started to try all sorts of things. And I mean, health is not complex. When you start to ask the right questions, it's not science or pseudoscience as they practice, because it's not real science what comes out of their mouths anyway. And I just dived into it, and I started making notes about what I was doing, because it was quite complex, the various things I wanted to try before we started to simplify stuff. And those notes just became mind maps and bigger mind maps and then bigger mind maps. And then I started to write stuff down, and other people were hearing that she was still fine. And I thought at one point, because so many people were asking for it, I'll just put it into a book, but it was never meant as a book to sell to people. It's only ever been notes to me because I don't want to forget what I've learned and what I've remembered. And so that's really how I designed it. It's not for me to say, this is what you do, Nigel, you'll be fine. It's no, look, this is what was going on, and if you do this, this is the kind of effect you get. And we're all built from the same stuff, so we all respond broadly the same way. And that's really how that whole thing came about.
Yeah.
And it's evolved because I don't see that journey ever ending. So I designed it as an ebook, and I designed it so that when I learn something new, or I need to backstep something or change something or add or refine, I can do that. And once you have the book, every time there's an update, you get a new version of the book available to you with a changelog. You can go to the changelog like a piece of software, and you can click on a hyperlink, and it takes you to the bit I've added, changed, modified, whatever, so that you're always being kept up to date. Because otherwise, I could never get any information out to anyone, because things change. You know, we've been living in the dark for so long. We're all starting to remember and become aware of things. So that, for me, has to be kept up to date, which is why there's probably only ever going to be one book.
Absolutely. I love the idea of it being an updatable repository of knowledge, you know, where you can just keep updating your notes and sharing that. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But I wanted to pick up on something you just mentioned there, you know, that the health isn't really difficult, is it?
No.
And I think the biggest problem really is the allopathic system that most people are used to. You know, I grew up going to the doctor and you know, automatically respecting anyone with a stethoscope and a white coat, and you sort of implicitly.
By the way, just to interject, have you ever noticed how they have them standing in the background on all the news feeds? Wonder why that is.
To appeal to that subconscious programming in my childhood.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the challenge, it seems to be, and this was what I noticed on my own personal journey to sort of extricating myself from all of that belief in the doctor that's sort of programmed into us, and I think that's the biggest hurdle to somehow sort of break that shatter that confidence in your doctor and step out on your own and embrace the idea that you know, maybe it's different to the way they're saying. And as soon as people do that a bit, as soon as I did it a bit, I noticed, gosh, you know, you find something that's at odds with the mainstream, and then you find another thing, and you have a look at both of them, or you should compare, because obviously two contradictory things can't both be true, can't both be right.
No.
And you find out that, you know, people are having massive success with something. It could be any issue. It could be you know, it could be cancer, it could be a teeth issue. I had problems with my teeth, which was my main lead in. And you find out that this is nonsense, and then of course you look to the next thing and you find that that's nonsense too, and it snowballs. But for the people that I know that are sort of still in the matrix, as I say, they seem to struggle with throwing out the conventional view. They just can't separate from it. What's your view on that?
Well, I think there's a lot of magician spells, if you will, a lot of brainwashing that goes on. There's a lot of indoctrination, and that's really what the whole schooling thing is about. They spend your entire school life teaching you how to not question anything that comes out of a book or out of authority. And it takes a long time to get people around to that, because I think you could teach people what they really need to know to survive, you know, basic communications, mathematics and stuff. You could do it inside of 6 months easily.
Absolutely.
The rest of the
I
time...
have to interject here because I saw one of your recent uploads, and you know, the asking questions, and you mentioned that you always got in trouble for asking questions. Which is, you know, it's classic, isn't it? I'm sure a lot of us have memories. I laughed when you said that because I remember the same thing. And isn't that crazy? Sorry, I didn't mean to do right.
Well, no, it's fine. And really that whole, the reason I put that video out about questions is because I think that's pivotal to everything, is that you've got to get used to asking questions again. And then the truth, it's such a subjective word, your truth, because everyone says, you know, like when you go to court, they say, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. The moment you say yes, you've shot yourself right in the heart and the foot, because you don't know the truth. No one knows the truth. You know your truth, right? So when you ask questions, you start to discover more of your truth. And I think that's critical. And as far as the health thing goes, when you really break it down, there's only two things. It doesn't matter what disease label there is. You've either got a toxicity issue or you have a deficiency issue. And if you start from that very simple premise, everything becomes a lot easier to deal with. And that's really what we did was, well, what could toxically be happening here? What could we be deficient of? And don't really jump into the whys, because that's what people have been trained to do. Well, why would they do that? And why does this happen? push that to one side for now. Work out what's going on with the questions. Ask yourself what would be a great question to ask that would reveal some information to me, however you want to do it. And you will start to get to the crux of the matter. But I think one of the other big problems, Nigel, is that people are so desperate for someone else to fix them, someone else to solve the problem. Yeah. And this really comes back. I think we're in the predicament we're in, and we are working our way through that predicament because we need to take complete responsibility for ourselves. No one else, ourselves. And when you do that, you're in a much better place to move forwards with your own health because it starts to make sense.
Absolutely. And that's one of the cultural hurdles that I suppose that a lot of people out there have when they're, you know, programmed to listen to the doctor and to obey the government and to obey the teacher. And this sort of, it's almost a sort of a following mentality, isn't it? And it's easier that way with somebody telling you what to do at every stage. And
it's more dangerous too.
Much more dangerous. But of course, as you rightly point out, you know, a successful life begins with taking responsibility for your health, but for everything, you know, taking responsibility for your whole experience.
Well, and for some people, you're absolutely right. But for some people, it's a jump too far because they're so conditioned to look outside themselves for everything, which allows the creation of a nanny state, if you will. Take a hold of one thing, anything, I don't care how small it is, and get into grips with that, and then take hold of the next thing and the next thing. And cumulative, you can just. Have you ever heard of Stu Middleman?
No, I haven't.
He's a really interesting guy. I believe he still holds the world long distance record. He ran something like 1,000 miles in 11 days.
Wow.
And he was in better shape at the end than the beginning. So he's running the equivalent. I think it was, and people check because I may have this wrong, but I think he was running the equivalent of 3 marathons a day. When he first started running, he couldn't run to the lamppost at the end of the street without getting out of puff. So incrementally, we are capable of doing the most incredible things. You just have to take a step and another step and another step. And that's really the key because we're taught that it's overwhelming. It's too big. Don't think about it. Put a movie on, watch Netflix, eat some popcorn, have some junk. If you just discipline yourself to do something a little different and a little different, before you know it, you've got that little tiny shift in trajectory now will take you to a whole different world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's true with the pursuit of truth, isn't it? Because there's a sort of a public perception out there that it's just all too big and crazy and complex and oh me can't possibly figure it out. And you know, I say an emphatic no to that. And you know, you're speaking into a part of that is that you just take one step at a time and you'll get there. But also, you know, I think truth is knowable and discoverable. Of course, you can't know everything. That would be silly. But you can be certain about what you do know. And, you know, I've learned, as indeed you have, that the allopathic model of medicine, as we've grown up with, is not the route to health. You know, it's a disease management program. And of course, it's been so politicized.
Yeah, it's a profit program.
Say again?
It's a profit program, and you don't make profit by making people well. And I mentioned this to someone the other day, and it was something I read a long time ago. If the medical industry, instead of taking money for its treatments and its other things, if we just treat them as that, if we paid them all £100 a month each and we didn't pay them when we got sick, they'd soon get their act together.
Yeah, a different model is needed entirely.
That's right, yeah. But I mean, a self-reliant model is what's needed, Nigel, because you're responsible for what you expose your body to. Sometimes indirectly, no, because there's plenty of EMF radiation that we're not directly responsible for, and environmental toxins. But you're eating stuff, you're using household products, you're drinking certain types of water, you're smoking things. You know, you're doing those things to yourself. And awareness of what they do is really part of the first step.
Absolutely, and again, sort of coming back to this, you know. It's too much, I can't handle it sort of thought that most people have. I think this is incorrectly instilled in us in our you know, dumbed down so-called education system, which is nothing of the sort really. And we're sort of encouraged to sort of believe it's all too much, you know, just leave it to the experts, ask the experts. But when you point out, and I'm totally in agreement with you with those two fundamental health principles, avoid toxicity and get the right stuff so you can rebuild and build your body as you go. And those two foundational principles, it's none of it's really that complicated. None of it is too intellectually challenging, is it? It's all accessible, but it does have to be taken one step at a time. And I think the sort of newcomer to the concept of taking responsibility for their own health has to appreciate that it's just a journey, isn't it? I mean, I gather from what I know about you, it took some years to collect your knowledge, and I spent about 5, 6,
still collecting
years Absolutely, and we're still learning about it. I just learned a quick interjection. I just learned about something called KARTSU, blood flow restriction training, recently, and I'm
Okay.
absolutely bowled over by it. I mean, I can't find out enough about it, but
Yeah.
it just represents another step along the way in our ever expanding knowledge, isn't it? And your ever
Yeah.
expanding book.
Well, yeah. I mean, like the Jin Shinjitsu is something I came across the other day when I was doing some research based on what I was reading in Arthur Furstenberg's book, The Invisible Rainbow, when he was talking about the kind of microtubules that are throughout your entire body, which is what the energy flows through, the electricity flows through. But you don't see them in dead bodies because they collapse as soon as you die. He found it by studying live animals. And that led me to looking at the energy meridians, which was the teeth, which came back to Jerry Tennant's work I've been looking at recently to try and figure out why pH was important and what the mechanism was and what it really is. And it's not just acid and alkaline, it's a measure of voltage, which I didn't realize. But the Jin Shinjitsu is a method of using very similar to acupuncture, but just with touch. And it's extraordinarily powerful. It's amazing. And you can do it yourself, and it's very, very gentle, and it's just marvelous. So again, things just come up and you think, I always say to myself, how is it I never came across this?
Yeah,
Because it's been around for thousands of years.
yes. And it's regrettable that our culture, as I look back, I'm in my 50s, as I look back through my life, the culture that I've been raised in,
Yeah,
really has been very dominated by a system, particularly of medicine. That's quite an obvious one. And there really hasn't been a general sort of open-minded attitude within that profession. It's like a closed shop, isn't it? You get a government license, or all doctors are regular.
Well, don't forget, they did another 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years of indoctrination, which is involved in you get no sleep, you're stressed out of your head, they overload you with nonsense. I mean, that's just mind control, but that's what they've gone through. So it's no surprise that they can't do stuff. In fact, from my experience, and it's been 30 years since I've seen a doctor for myself, is that they can't do anything unless they can make a diagnosis, which is what all the tests are about. And I was talking with Amanda Vollmer about this the other night. And from that diagnosis, then they look at the treatment. Well, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a failed paradigm.
I'm sorry, let me add one thing. Sorry for interjecting.
No, go on.
Most doctors, I believe, are doing things for the right reasons. It's just the training is wrong, and there's more and more doctors waking up. I don't want anyone in the medical field to think I'm against all doctors. I'm not. I'm against the incorrect training they've had, which then leads them to believe that all roads that they should take are one way. They're not. There's many different ways to get where you're going.
Absolutely. And I think that there's a false paradigm, really, that there's a false model being followed, which of course suits the tag team of government and big pharma. It's a big gravy train, absolutely.
Yeah.
But this false paradigm is really where we're now in this current alleged pandemic situation. We're presented with an opportunity to shatter this false paradigm, which is exciting. And part of me is very optimistic, but another part of me, when I look around and I see the lack of resistance to all the rules and the loss of political freedom, I feel less than optimistic. But just to stick with the medical paradigm for a moment, as I know you're familiar, the concept of germ theory, the concept of
emphasis on the second word, please.
Yeah, theory. The theory of infectious disease, which has never been proven and which remains a theory. It underpins the whole paradigm, doesn't it? And this was being challenged in recent years by this whole explosion in the interest of gut health. And I certainly, for one, got very interested in gut health. And the importance of
it's a good place to start, since about 80% of your immune system resides in the bacteria in your gut, which is why the antibiotics are there to kill it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this idea that a broad, diverse microbiome is a good thing flies in the face of germ theory, because germ theory would have us believe that all these little fungi and protozoa and microbes and viruses, and it's like, oh, it's a dangerous place, they're everywhere,
Well, I hate to tell people, if you don't know, you'd be dead without them.
Absolutely. So the whole model that our health systems, if we can't really call them that, our disease.
Well, they are systems, but they're mislabeled.
Absolutely, and they rest on this idea, this theory of infectious disease, and that that is really brought to the fore here, because I know a lot of us truthers, yourself included, Amanda Vollmer, a whole host of other thinking people. Andy Kaufman obviously springs to mind, questioning this historical come from of germ theory, and going back to the history of Beauchamp and Pasteur, etc. And we find that there's no evidence. We talk to people like Stefan Lanker and so forth, and there's so many great books out there at the moment, exposing the fact that no viruses have ever been actually isolated according to the dictionary definition that you and I are familiar with. They are according to the virologist's definition of isolation, which is kind of different.
And by the way, if you write a Freedom of Information request to Public Health England or Wales or many other organisations, they will all confirm they haven't got that information either.
Yeah, it's shocking, isn't it? So there's no actual isolation, purification, identification of these little things that are supposed to be causing all the problem, and that's such big news, isn't it? It's such this strikes right to the heart of this false paradigm.
It does, but you're up against something, and I was talking with Tom about this last night, that you've got what you know and what you believe, and beliefs are very, very dangerous things because they'll lead you into all sorts of different places that you've got no business going. It's what you know. You and I know what's right. We know what's wrong. Everybody does. They can feel it instinctively. It's hardwired into their DNA. And they want you to believe this, which is why they're constantly jamming it down your throat with all the imagery, the false numbers, everything. That's what this is all about. They want that belief because then they can pin this upside down pyramid on that little tiny point called germ theory. And it's about building up your own knowing, because when you know something, it doesn't matter what anyone else believes. It's completely irrelevant. And I think that's the point that people can get to with their own questioning process, is how do I get to the point where I know what's going on? Not what I believe, because I'm very careful now about saying I believe anything, because it's just such a dangerous ground.
Yeah. It was the work of Ayn Rand that cautioned me on beliefs. When she said, "I don't believe anything, I hold convictions."
Yes.
And convictions obviously built on a rational hierarchy of knowledge.
Yes.
And I think you're absolutely right. We do have to be very careful with what you believe, because you can hold beliefs in the absence of evidence, and indeed in the presence of evidence that contradicts the belief.
Well, they're useful to build your model on of what you see, your map of the territory, if you will. But be aware of what they are and what they're supported by, which is nothing.
Yes, absolutely. So where do you see this going, Adrian? Where do you see this whole crazy political situation we're in? We've suddenly sort of warped out of the world as we knew it.
That's right.
2019. We've had almost a year of this crazy stuff going on. It's sometimes I find myself looking back at the things I used to do in childhood and going out and parties and discos and sports and things, and all of a sudden this is now a great big problem. Okay, the lockdown might end on the 8th of March, and then when's the next one, and then when's the next virus, until we nail down the germ theory thing. So we're in the middle of this crazy sort of shift into a different political scenario, aren't we? Where do you are you generally an optimist? Do you see people ultimately saying enough, this is crazy, or do you think tyranny might last a little bit longer than perhaps people think it might?
I think I know where it's going to end up, certainly from what I can see. But one of the biggest problems is everyone is still looking to an outside authority, and you are the author. You are the authority of your own life. And the idea that someone can be responsible for making decisions for you, it is just the most absurd thing when you start to apply some questions and some logic to, certainly from where I sit. So I think that what people are trying to do is they're hopeful that that is going to change. You can't change what's broken. You've got to bring something new in, and we've got to create it from the ground up. And I suspect that a lot of people will end up getting very, very sick. Many probably will die if they continue down the path of trusting what's being fed to them in terms of information. I noticed that the governments and the powers that shouldn't be are very, very good at trying to get other people to enforce all their regulations and ideas, like business owners, for example, and all this enforced masking and all the rest of it. But I do believe that more and more people, I don't like the term the awakening, because that to me is a bit of an insult to say people are asleep. I think I'd rather say that they're having a growing awareness that something isn't right. And that awareness now will help them get to the point where the ones that want to take a different path, because everyone can take their own path, their own experience, their own life. They're doing, they've got their own part in the play that they call their life. They can do that. What I have trouble with is when someone wants to interfere with my life and how I wish to express it. I don't want to do any harm. I don't want to cause any loss. I don't want to engage in any trickery. But I want to be able to do my thing. So you shouldn't be turning up at my place and saying you will have this and you won't do that, because I'll send you on your way, if you're lucky, with just a flea in your ear. So I think we will. I'm very optimistic about where it's going, because I've been around this information for about 20 years now. And I actually thought during my lifetime we'd never get to the point where we'd see things are going to change. And I think now we're at that point, and it's very exciting, where we are seeing change. Now, how long it takes, I don't know. I can't see it ending anytime soon, until probably about 1% of the population getting into their own hearts and their own minds that this isn't the way forwards, and we will come up with our own way forwards, little tiny communities, because we're strong when we're united. Not the idea of some big global thing, that we know that doesn't work, but little tiny groups, small holdings like you have, and small stuff like that, doing their thing, looking after themselves and sharing information and ideas, and standing on each other's shoulders and helping each other. That, I believe, is the way forwards, and a very responsible way forwards, because we're all taking responsibility. If people insist on looking to any external source to lead them out of this, to guide them out of this, you are in for a very rude awakening, if indeed you do wake up from it.
Yeah, I agree that the belief in authority, as Locke and Rose wrote about in his excellent book, which I'll put a link to, the belief in authority is really at the root of the problem, isn't it? The fact that,
yes,
it speaks back to this issue of responsibility.
Yeah.
But we do all see, or I certainly see when I look around me, and go out and about to the shops and so forth, and indeed, consult my sort of social circle.
Yeah.
Although that's remote at the moment, of course. Most people are still looking to be rescued. They're looking to be saved from this situation by government, tragically enough. I mean, the implication, of course, of donning your mask every time you go into a shop, and kowtowing to all this social distancing nonsense, is that somehow the government, through all their crazy, inconsistent and contradictory rules, somehow that's going to lead us to a better place, which of course is absolute nonsense.
No, well, all that confusion they're creating is very intentional. It's all part of the mind game. It's an NLP technique, because when you confuse people, they go inside to try and process. Their subconscious is wide open, and you can feed in all the information you want.
NLP, yes, that's an interesting one, because I mean, I look at it as, you hear people say, oh, it doesn't make sense, you can do this but you can't do that, and you can do that but you can't do that, etc., etc. And my take on that is that, well, if you start with a false premise, germ theory, if you come all the way upstream of your chain of reasoning, and germ theory, the idea that viruses exist, well, that's false for a start. So anything that follows along, Imperial College's epidemiological computer models with Neil Ferguson, they're somewhere downstream of that false premise, and that's false as well. And then nothing can make sense to my mind downstream of a false premise. So
I'm with you there.
Once you start acting on this false premise, there cannot be consistency, because we've actually sort of left the rails of reality. We're goodness knows where we are.
Yeah, I did a video about that. I think it was April time last year, may have been May, where I was pointing out that everything pivots off that one point. And for those people who are watching this that aren't familiar with it, there are plenty of resources. For example, if you go onto my website, fortheloveoftruth.co.uk, you'll find there's a section called Germ Theory, and there's a whole bunch of documents in there that you can go and examine. And I think one of the points I want to make is that I don't expect anyone to think like me. God forbid. You need to think like yourself. But there are resources there that you can take, you can examine, you can question, you can accept, integrate, dismiss. It doesn't matter to me. I've just put them there so that there's a resource, I mean, primarily for me, that I can go back to and refer to, but also for other people. And I think people should take that journey and take it upon themselves. I mean, one of my subscribers, a great guy called Gary, who wrote a wonderful 20-something page letter, which I read out a while back. And he said to me that actually, I thought you were way wide in the mark. I think he was probably a bit more direct than that. But he said, I did what you said, which is to start asking questions. And I've realized it's a very dark, murky world. And that's really what it is. And that's where the questions will take everybody, that if they take responsibility for educating themselves, and don't take anything I say, you say, or anyone else says, but take it with a pinch of salt and say, right, what does this actually mean? Let's have a look at this and just float with it and see where it takes you. Because in my experience, this whole scam falls down on one or two questions. Now, if you get 5 or 10 or 15, which you will get to, you'll just destroy the whole thing. It can't stand. But as you say, it all pivots on that one thing. It's based on the false idea of germ theory.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so this whole idea of questioning authority or people's predisposition or not to question authority is really quite pivotal, isn't it, on what happens. Whichever outcome we have, coming out of this sooner or later, or not at all, depends on.
But they won't let us out of it. Their plan is to never let us out of this because the game is too rich for them, and they're too committed to their game.
I agree that the pandemic card is just too useful to put back in the deck. It's just it's going to remain there. But I do also hold the conviction that if enough people just simply didn't accept it, of course, our political systems, a lot wrong with them as there is. If sufficient numbers of people would challenge authority, then of course things would be different. So this speaks to this issue of, what sort of percentage of people even have the capacity to reject the, I sometimes refer to it as sort of sucking at the teat of the mainstream narrative, of the government, of the media, of everything. It's this huge, great informational resource that people need to somehow break away from. And, it's a cold, lonely, independent place over here where you have to think for yourself. And I'm not convinced that everyone has the capacity to end up over here. I think the vast majority, let's throw a number out at 80% or so, maybe even more, are helplessly, dependent on their informational sustenance from this great big thing, and they're actually intellectually incapable, or through their lack of confidence, or maybe just basic thinking skills, they're incapable of moving into this place called independent thinking. And I can't help conclude that it's over here that we need to find more people in order to break down this whole false paradigm of germ theory, this whole nonsense of the political control that's to protect us against this nasty invisible bogeyman. Do you think that those people who are really, really plugged in are hopelessly plugged in, or do you see some optimism that even they can find a way to independent thinking and intellectual sovereignty to go, yes, I believe this, or I hold this conviction, I know this to be true? What's your view on that in terms of people's potential?
Well, I think you raised several things there, and I'll see if I can remember them all because I was making note of them, but then you were carrying on. I was like, oh God, I hope he stops so I can get to this. One of the challenges is, I think, that we shouldn't assume that we know better than someone else, and the life choice and the experiential choice they want during this lifetime. It may well be that sucking on that teat of information is they're playing their part as much as the person delivering the information is playing their part, and that may be something they want to do. I think they have the capacity and the capability, but they have been dumbed down and indoctrinated by an education system, by an information system called programming. That's what you do when you watch television. You're watching a program to get you to think a certain way. It also lowers your brain frequency. You've got fluoride in the water in a lot of places that dumbs you down. There's all sorts of toxins. And I believe that we're probably operating at a few percent of what we're really capable of. Now, with that said, I have seen more people in the last 3 or 4 months than I saw in the last 7 or 8 years start to question this and say, something's not right. Something's not right. And that's really all it takes. I don't think you have to get someone from over there to over here. All you have to do is, it's like a knock on the head, unscrew it, drop an idea and screw the head on, shake it a little bit and run off. And they'll go, what's that? That's troubling me. They will. If you hand them the light bulb, they can plug it in and turn it on, or they don't have to. They might not know what it is. It doesn't matter. And that's always been my take on this, is you carry on and do what you want to do. I think it's wrong, and I'm going to put some content, some information together to share it. Here it is. You can have a look at it. I don't expect you to believe it. Just question it, poke holes in it. I might be wrong. Let me know, and I'll fix it. And then really do that. And then the ones that move, because I remember looking at Greg Braden's work years ago, back in probably about 2005, 2006. And he was saying that, you need 1% to shift, and then everything shifts for everybody. And I think we're rapidly approaching that point because there are so many people, even people that I knew were very entrenched in their old way of thinking, are starting to say, what the fuck is going on here? And that's the critical bit, that if more people do that, we'll get more people thinking. But again, we can, there's got to be ways we can do our own thing and they can still carry on doing their thing. They're not going to control everything. They say they are, but that's all part of the fear game. They can't possibly control the entire game, even with all their 5G nonsense and all their digital currencies and all the rest of it, because we, the creators that we are, and the connection that we have to the much higher version of ourselves that's just having this life experience here, we are capable of everything unless we disconnect ourselves and plug into their wired mainframe, which is what they're trying to get us to do, because then they can control the reality. Right now, we can be slippery like the water and just envelop it, move, run downhill. We can do all sorts of crazy things that they cannot do because they're just a big blunt instrument when it comes down to it. Whereas we're this kind of very fine, ethereal energy experiencing life. That's what it feels like to me. And I think that the ones that want to find their way through this, Nigel, will. And the ones that want to stay stuck to that nipple that they're stuck on, stuck in all the information into it, that's where they'll stay. And that's absolutely fine. It doesn't trouble me. They've made their choice. What troubles me is if you try and disconnect from that and interfere with me. Yeah. I'll try and deal with you, but in the end, you're going to leave me to run my life because it's my life and I'm doing my thing with it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And this sort of speaks into the problem of a democracy, because unfortunately, I would say that those people who prefer to stay over there are my problem and they're your problem. Because if they're 80% of people, then democracy says that what they think holds sway, and you and I get crushed by the strong arm of the state.
Well, that's why they brought democracy in. It's mob rule. All we've got to do this way is just convince 50% of the people. In fact, we don't have to. We just have to tell people we've convinced 50% and they'll still buy into it because they won't think.
But I love your analogy of sort of unscrewing the head, popping out here and running away.
I do that all day long.
It conjures up very humorous images. But again, I remain to be convinced, I should say, that that will work in every case. I mean, clearly that can work.
No, nothing does. Nothing works all of the time. But if you stay flexible, if you can just touch one person's life and have them have them become aware, have them start to think, drop a question on them and see if the question does the trick. I'm constantly moving my ground, moving my questions, trying to figure out, okay, someone said something there that kind of suggests that the light's maybe trying to come on here. So let's just see if we can amp it up a tiny bit for them without going too far. Because one of the things I think we all have, Nigel, when you've been around a lot of information for a long time, when someone asks you a question, there's a great temptation to regurgitate and vomit everything all over them. And they stand there going, what just happened? It's much nicer to be a little more subtle and delicate and to give them a little spoonful and another spoonful and say, by the way, if you like that, there's another tin of that in there. There's another packet over there. Ooh, just hit the mic. And that really works well for people, I found, certainly recently.
I guess it's true, as you said, not everybody is the same, but I mean, I don't want to appear to be unnecessarily pessimistic, but from my studying of thinking skills and reason and logic and finding truth, it appears to me fairly clear that the education system has worked over the last few decades in that it has produced the vast majority of people who cannot think. They lack the ability to conceptualize. They lack the ability to zoom out and see these concepts, abstract concepts, that you can't touch peace and freedom and justice and contagion. And anyway, you have to be able to zoom out and see all these different concepts from a sort of a higher perspective. I make the analogy of zooming up for your 30,000-foot view of the earth, and you can see how towns all relate to each other. But if you lack the basic ability to join dots in your head to to be able to extrapolate, to be able to see implications, to be able to make connections. So there's a whole big topic, but there's a whole basket full of crucial thinking skills that a lot of people who are more aware necessarily have, and they've developed these things in spite of their education, I would say. But my contention is still that because so many people just don't have those skills, I remain to be convinced that no matter how many ideas we pop in their head, there will be a fixed number, a certain number, I don't know what it is, of some people that it's like not having any legs and someone saying, quick, run over here. It's just like, oh, you just fall out of your chair. You just can't do it. And I think that there's an element of this which will necessarily affect our future in this political craziness we're in as a result of the coronavirus alleged pandemic. So this sort of informs my degree of pessimism, if you like. I think.
Well, I would agree with that. I'm also going to throw a bit of a curveball at you and see what you do with it, because the very idea of completely logical thinking traps you into the left part of your brain, and it doesn't allow you into the right part of your brain. It doesn't allow you into your heart. It doesn't allow you into your gut, where you all have brain cells and intelligence. And I think that one of the things to do is, and it's something I learned to do, that when I tried to reason and logic my way through problems, I made monumental mistakes. When I started to say, right, what's my imagination telling me? What do I feel like doing? And I trust my instincts and my feelings. Yet as growing up, I was told, stop doing that. Think. So I did. And that's where I got trapped. So it's not a criticism of you. It's just something that you might want to float with as well, that as you bring more elements of yourself to bear, you then become a whole thinking, feeling being, which is how we're designed. So I trust part of your instincts are, there's a problem. Then you get jumping into your brain to rationalize that. I get that. But I know plenty of people that intellectually aren't that bright, but my God, they're good at reading situations, and their instincts are so off the chart accurate because they're working that area very, very well. And I think if we learn to work all areas, we've got a much better chance of making progress, rather than just saying, well, if you can't think, we're fucked. If you can feel, we're all right.
I agree with you. Left brain, right brain, that's a very valid point. And I would never advocate that everybody sort of be, focused on problem solving all the time. And you make a great point. But I would still hold that even if we, whatever level of right brain integration we have with our left brain, and I'd like to think that I've got a good degree. But
I know I was digging at you, but you do.
but if we simply lack the metaphorical legs of our left brain, then we just can't go anywhere. And
that can be taught straight. That can be taught to people. True. You can say, look, here's some questions. That's why I did the video about questions. I gave them a set of questions to ask, and make your own questions up. And that really, 17 minutes can summarize, and it's not to say it's got all the answers, it hasn't, but it's got a lot of the questions.
I agree.
You can do that with people. You can get them to that point.
Yeah.
Because they're doing this questioning process anyway, but the questions are pretty dull. So, put a bit of flavor, a bit of spice into the questions and see where it takes you.
Yeah, it's a very good point that it can be learned, and thank you for making that. I just wanted to raise the other component, because sort of having the thinking skills is one component, but also having the inclination to ask the questions. And this is like another stage lower in fundamentality. It's do you want to know, or are you happy to remain in your blissful ignorance? And
you've nailed it with that. There's a lot of people sat there.
Absolutely. And most people who are sucking at the teat of the mainstream, of the matrix, they are disinclined to exert any effort. Because out here in the scary wilderness of independent thinking, it's all very frightening, and it's just a lot easier, and it's effortless if you stay plugged in. So I think the probably the first hurdle is the inclination, isn't it? The actual inclination to even find out, because our ability to find out is one thing, but until we get up off the sofa to do something, nothing will happen.
No, you're right. I mean, like with the thing with health with my mother, and then with my girlfriend. If those two events hadn't happened, there's no way I'd have driven as hard into this as I had driven. But what's interesting was it wasn't an intellectual decision. It was purely emotional. It was purely feeling, I can't stand this. That's what drove the intelligence, which is interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, that reminds me of the phrase, how much suffering do you need? I don't mean that relating to you and your mother, but
No, you're right. Yeah.
but for people in general, it's like the frog in the pot. You have to turn the old thermometer up a bit before people will think, shit, what's going on?
Yeah, but if you turn it slow, they won't.
Yeah, there's another little problem.
And that's also back to this conversation we were having. I think they've turned the water up a little too quick for too many people.
Yes. Now that's a really interesting idea. That's something I've been thinking about. Can they get away with this? It's as though they've really pushed it out on a far edge of the limb, and there's a bit of a gamble, isn't there? Because it could go either way,
which is why I'm always in favor of fucking do more. Bring it on, because more people go, what? And that's what it needs. I think one of the things I've learned to do as well is to not assume that the idea I've come up with is right, but let's look at the polar opposite and see how that really float lots of ideas around. And the idea that actually the more they do, the more quickly and the more ridiculous it gets, the more people that, as you say, were very comfortable doing their thing. And please, if you're one of them and you're watching this, I'm not trying to insult you. I'm just, if you want some ideas, grab a hold of them, take a look at it. The more they do that with people, the more people are going to go, all right, this is ridiculous. What's going on?
Yeah.
That's the point. I don't care how people get there, poke, prod, pulled, cooked, boiled, doesn't matter. As long as you get to the point where you ask a question, you will set yourself free. It's already hardwired in everyone. They just have to get to the point.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm going to pick up on a point that you raised a few moments ago, and I'm going to go out on a limb here. I could get shot down for this, but we mentioned, can anybody know better? And I think you hinted at the idea that maybe they don't. It's just different for everybody. But I'm going to go out on a limb, bit of devil's advocate, you could say. I'm going to venture that maybe there is such thing as knowing better. Maybe some people do know better than others, because, for example,
only in the context of their own life.
Well, what about in the context of a democracy and the fact that an ignorant majority can be the anchor, that the millstone that pulls you and I to the bottom of the sea?
Well, it can, which is why we need communities, or we need to disappear.
Yeah, if I could do a mind meld with everybody in the world, for example, indulge me.
I don't think you'd survive. I think you'd be so horrified you'd go pop and then be finished.
I'd be fried. But if I could impart the idea of the non-aggression principle, the basic principle upon which I'd like to think that my life is guided, and I don't care what you do or anybody else does, as long as you alluded to the same thing a while ago, as long as you don't make me do it, everything's cool. Talk to me about it. You might even persuade me to do it too. But the non-aggression principle, I think, is so powerful. If everybody could be conscious of that, shall we say, and see the wisdom and the truth of it, because in the same way that you or I wouldn't want someone to say, "Oh, do me 50 press-ups," we wouldn't just get down and meekly go, "Oh, so," we don't want to be told what to do. We don't want to be pushed around, and if we could sort of mind meld that idea to everyone, then some people, in theory, would know better, would they not?
Well, no, they would, but that's what these discussions are all about, because you're exploring concepts and ideas in a way that hopefully people can go, actually, that kind of makes sense. Because their system is all about force and violence, which is why you have the armed forces, you have the police force. It's all about that.
Absolutely.
Which is why I think they keep pushing people so hard to get to breaking point, so that then they can militarize everything, because then they can use more forces against us. Yeah. And I agree 100%. And I'm going to put a caveat in there that I am very much in favor of non-aggression, but I'm also in favor of learning how to defend ourselves against aggressors. So there has to be some level of balance in there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a pacifist. If someone were attacking one of my kids or my wife, I would use whatever level of force was necessary, probably be a lot of over use of force. And obviously defense is morally acceptable. It's the difference between killing someone through murder or defending yourself.
Yeah.
And absolutely, we have to do that. But so it sounds as though you are essentially optimistic, which is great. I mean, I love it. You know, give me more optimism. It sounds as though you're coming from a place where you can see some kind of end to this, and like you said, the more they turn up the heat, the more crazy the whole thing seems. And I agree, there's a greater likelihood of more people, being sparked.
Well, the way I view it's really simple. I'm stood next to the boiling pan, and I've got a nice refreshing drink and a ladder, and saying, "You climb the ladder. Here's a cold drink, and get in your way."
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because I have a close friend who has been in the matrix, I would say, to a large degree, maybe one foot slightly out every now and again. And over the decades that we've known each other, I've fed him all sorts of little snippets, like you said earlier. Here's a jar of this if you like it. You can have some more later. And he has been privy to a lot of my thinking that I've shared, and I'm just wittering on to a friend as a sort of a sounding board, and I not with any intention to change his mind or persuade, and yet I still see him comfortably on the sofa, comfortably plugged in, maybe not comfortably, maybe with a high degree of anxiety actually, and depression, and then this sort of feeds into another conversational tack. The idea of unscrewing someone's head, popping an idea in and zizzing it up can, for some people, just result in anxiety because they think, shit, I don't know what to do. Cognitive dissonance. He says that, they say that. And so, this experience with a close friend has sort of, I suppose, has informed my my thinking in terms of not being quite so optimistic as other people in the short term. I do think the old "how much suffering do you need" theory will kick in, and even if it took us 2, 3, or 4 decades of communist style tyranny, I'm confident that humanity would come out the other side of it eventually. But my goodness, I hope that it doesn't come to that.
Well, I'd go with that, and I'd like a little caveat as well. When I said about unscrewing people's heads and dropping ideas in, I don't do it to everybody. It's just the people that want the information. Otherwise, you're right, you can cause stress, and you do them a disservice, and you do them harm. It's like I had someone recently say, "Well, you had the answer to that. Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Because you never asked me." It's not down to me to ram it down your throat. It's up to you to ask the question. If you ask the question, I'll give you some information. Someone said to me, "Well, show me where all your research is then." And I said, "Really? All right, fair enough. There's a website there with about 340 pages on it of research leading to books with several thousand pages. Go and have a look if you want." They didn't even, the people around me, some of my friends don't know I do this. They don't know I've got a YouTube channel. They don't know I've got a big website doing all the stuff, but it's there just for people. And I think because that allows them, you treat them with grace to take their own journey. But as far as you said, 2 to 3 or 4 decades, I'm not feeling that kind of time span, thank goodness. I think it might be faster and perhaps a little more bumpy along the way.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the factors that mitigates against that view, in my mind, is that there are quite a lot of intellectual people. There are all these doctors, the Andy Kaufmans and the Dolores Cahills, and all of these people doing really great work. And yes, the censorship is happening, but it's relatively mild at the moment. We have to agree, it's there, it's growing. But when you evaluate all these factors and you think there's a lot of people out there that know what's going on, and they're not being silent, and to me that says, well, the state would necessarily see them as a problem, or the tag team, if you like, the people that control the state. Because it's not even about the state, is it? There's control above the state. The state.
Oh, absolutely. The state's just a shit show to keep us distracted.
Absolutely, the vehicle of force, as you pointed out. But where was I going with that? The agenda, the agenda for the political agenda for sort of globalist governance, the collectivist sort of agenda, which I think is a necessary pixel in people's dot joining in their minds to really grasp what's going on, in order to realistically not expect the lockdown to end this summer and everyone gets better and we all forget about it.
Just pause there. I've had an interesting thought for someone.
Please.
That when you said join the dots, we've all done that as children where we have the dot books and you join the dots. No, look, it's a rabbit, it's a carrot. Why don't you get the dots of these different things and draw out what you see? And I think that will be very revealing for people.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry for interrupting you.
No, good interruption. But where was I? Let me see. Let me recapture my thought.
And by the way, can I do another thing? Because I've just done something intentionally to you just to demonstrate.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, we talked about it the other day, didn't we?
Yeah, it's called a pattern interrupt.
Yeah.
And that when someone is on a certain pattern, like playing a piece of music on a CD, and you take the CD out and you scratch it like mad and you pop it back in, it won't play the same way. Now, I didn't actually do it intentionally to begin with because I thought I need to get that point out about joining the dots, but it proves the point that when you do interrupt someone's thinking, however fleetingly, with something else, they can't, excuse me, that's payback for doing what I just did. They can't necessarily get back to the same point. And that's also something that's quite useful to learn how to do, especially with police and people in authority. Like I'll ask them a daft question like, how long have you been so fat? Especially if they're not.
Yeah.
Or I really like your red underwear. And they go, what? Because what you're doing is you're breaking the pattern. So the conversation has to go in a different direction.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm so sorry for doing that to you. It was part intentional and the second part definitely was.
Very useful. I like it. And would that be part of NLP? Is that
yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah. Very, very interesting techniques and can be used to our advantage, can't they?
Works when kids are having tantrums.
Yeah. I like also the idea of I'd almost welcome having a conversation with somebody like you regularly doing that to me so that I could learn to maintain my mental train.
How many guitars have you got?
I have got about 5 or 6 guitars.
No, I've just done it again.
Another little tangent. So the proliferation of these experts around there that are on this subject, that know that this is a scam, that know that germ theory has never been proven, virus has never been isolated, purified, identified, visualized, etc. They are going to be a thorn in the side of the agenda, this globalist collectivist agenda, using governments in coordination all around the world to bring about the collectivist global vision and eugenics and goodness knows what else.
Yeah,
that agenda would have to recognize, my goodness, all these people are a problem and they need to be taken out. And of course, in Soviet Russia, early part of last century, that's precisely what the Soviet dictatorship did. And, you know, the gulags and all this, people were just simply removed, the dissidents.
By the way, if people haven't done any digging on that, they really want to have a look at what happened during that time and how many millions, tens of millions, or even hundreds of millions of people were brutally taken out.
Absolutely. Thank you for that interjection. So that those who are driving and championing this agenda, you know, and they're probably, we don't even see their faces or hear their names, but it all comes through Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, and whether it's the Trilateral Commission and the, you know, Event 201, all of these means that the agenda is filtered down through to us. They're going to see these thinking people, even people like you and I to some extent, as sort of lower down that hierarchy, as a problem. We're a thorn in the side of this agenda. And I make it my business to be a thorn in the side of anti-freedom, because I am all for peace, freedom. And
it's not just a thorn in the side. You know, I think in mechanical terms, let's throw some grit in the grease. You know, let's throw a small nut in there, a spanner in the works. Yeah, anything you can do that buggers up the machinery, even a tiny bit. And that's really the key, I think, to doing all this. It's to give people time to gradually go, hang on a sec, something's wrong. And the more we can do that, the better. But you're right, we are a thorn on the side. But when it comes down to it, who gives a fuck? This is our world. It's not their world. And they're not welcome here if they're going to carry on like that.
No, so you make a good point there implicitly, that we're not in the same place as the gulags or the, you know, Pol Pots and Mao Zedongs.
No, because they would have already done it. It's grossly inefficient. They would have simply brought the stuff out and done it.
But let's agree, let me interject this time, let's agree that we're coming from a position of relative political freedom, and the agenda is to go to a situation where China's the model and we have very, very little freedom. So there's room for maneuver in our current atmosphere of some freedom is necessarily limited. So they have to tread carefully. So coming all the way back to this point in a rather circuitous ramble, is the idea that given we're a spanner in the works, given that the agenda is necessarily going to be thwarted if you and I have our way, if we keep singing from the treetops like we are, and all of the other people that know a lot more than we do, all these other, learned people like Andy Kaufman, etc., they in theory, for the agenda to succeed, need to be taken out. They need to be silenced. We need to be removed. And I can't see and I think that draconian happening. I don't know about you. I struggle to see them really pulling out the stops and, sending people off, or disappearing people, maybe murdering people. Goodness knows. I hate to think that, but that so my point, to trying to wind it up into a succinct point, is that I think it's very difficult for this communism to succeed, and that for me mitigates against the idea of 20, 30, 40 years of darkness under tyranny. And I just wanted to bat that massive ball to you and see whether you said.
Let me just pick myself up now. I've been crushed by it. I think you're right, but have we not been living under tyranny now for several hundred years anyway? And this is just the end game.
Well, in a way, yes, but we have this degree of political freedom, and it was born with the creation of the United States, the first and only country in the world ever constituted in freedom, where people were actually above government. Government was actually a servant of the people.
Well, it's still that way everywhere, but some reason people have allowed themselves to be convinced otherwise.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that anywhere. I mean, Britain has historically.
No, I'm not saying that it appears that way. But if you can stand your ground and you know a few things, it is possible to stay in the right order of things. But you're absolutely right. America was the bastion, which I think is why they're working so hard to bring it to its knees.
Absolutely, and interesting things are going to happen with Biden at the helm over there now.
Oh God!
But we have this certain amount of freedom, which was sort of born of the American nation, and we had a fair amount of political freedom in England as a result of all this, more so than in Europe. Yeah, and we still have a hangover of that, that we're outside of the European Union at the moment with the whole Brexit thing. Yeah. So we've got this certain amount of manoeuvring room where we're just about free enough that we can do this. We can have these conversations. We can do a lot of things that they can't in China. And I do agree that there's been an agenda to try to enforce the Chinese model on the world. I think that's clear to be seen.
Look at Dan Andrews.
Sorry?
Look at Dan Andrews.
I don't know about Dan Andrews.
Dan Andrews, the premier of that part of Australia, Victoria, is it? That he's just rolling everything out?
Oh, yes.
They get 3 sick people, so you're going to be locked up for the rest of your life. And how fucking dare you think?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's interesting. We've got a certain amount of political maneuvering space. And so I do agree with your contention that we live under tyranny. Because I've learned that firsthand very clearly from my own experience. I'm not allowed to live on my own land according to the government. So I know we live under tyranny in that sense, but our manoeuvring space, I wonder whether it's just sufficient for us to, escape the worst case scenario. And
well, I think the door's closing, and I think the gap between you and the boat that's leaving is getting bigger, but. I know what I feel, that if we carry on and do nothing, then absolutely we deserve everything we get. But as more people become aware and say, look, no, because they have no authority. I know they say they do, and they've got the guns and they can lock you up and all the rest. Well, so what? They can't control your mind, which is why they're working so hard to control it. But I think you're right. That we still have some wiggle room, which is why we're all doing this. Because I was saying to Tom Barnett last night, once everything is said and done. Actually, it was another conversation where I was saying this as well. And the monsters are back in the cupboard, or we've simply destroyed the monsters, or however it's going to roll out, I don't know. A lot of us won't continue doing this. We'll just go back to doing our thing, which is what we want to do. We're only doing this right now to try and help in that little tiny space of freedom that we have, where we can pass information to and fro until it gets taken down. And that's the responsible thing to do, to try and build that community up, because as a community, we're strong. And that's why they want to isolate us, and we shouldn't allow ourselves to become isolated, which is what the entire model is about on their side.
Yeah. And it's so difficult for some people to resist that becoming isolated, isn't it? I mean, I've made various arrangements in my life where I'm not isolated. I've spent 10 years, maybe even more, getting ready for this tyranny. So I'm well prepared. But I see a lot of other people depending on where you live, if you've got neighbors all around that can see you coming and going from your front door, oh, you know, goodness me, it must be extremely difficult to maintain that necessary element of social contract. Was that a Freudian slip? Contact.
No, well, that's what it is.
Social contact. You know, we need that, don't we, as human beings? We need to reach out and touch and hug other people.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I would much rather be doing this conversation sat in that room with you. As opposed to this unreal thing where I'm looking at a digital image of you that may not even look like you. I don't know how it's being altered on the way to me and vice versa.
Yeah. Well, hopefully I look forward to inviting you down in your camper van and you know, come and park up in the woods
100%,
when we're allowed out. Goodness.
Well, but technically, I'm not even going to go there for people because, well, you can't do that. Well, you can do what you want.
Yeah.
And then,
absolutely.
But you have to know how to deal with it for now.
Yes, absolutely. You know, when people say to me, what can we actually do? I would always say, you know, take off that mask and, you know, do step out. And I just declare myself exempt at the drop of a hat, you know, exempt from anything. You know, I'm exempt from that law. Okay. At the moment, it pertains to wearing masks in shops.
Yeah.
You know,
I declared it by way of notices to Boris, Nadine, Matt, Twatcock, and all the rest of it. And also the idiots on the Welsh side. Now, they've all had notices, 3 notices saying that, you know, this is what I'm going to do unless you prove otherwise, and they haven't. So, you know, I've got it all with me. It's in the car if I go around. But to be fair, when you resonate at that particular level, you don't normally get too much drama coming to you because it's not your frequency.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, we have to act according to our convictions, don't we? We have to. I don't recognize any of the nonsense. So when I go to the supermarket, I won't wear a mask. And, you know, similarly with all other areas in which I conduct my life. But I do recognize that that's very, very difficult for some people in some circumstances.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You know, pending, you know, the degree of the population density. Basically, I mean, if you live in a very, very close community where there are lots of people can see what you're doing, it must be a lot harder to stand up and say, no, I'm not accepting this.
Well, it isn't. It isn't. I think you stand out more when you're out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot to be said for becoming a bit like a ninja and just maneuvering yourself around in amongst the crowd, and you won't get spotted.
Yeah, that's true too. So, I mean, in terms of freedom, this is one of the things why, you know, and coming full circle back to your book and so forth and health, is that with freedom to think what we want to think and to put in our mouths what we want to put in our mouths. Yeah. And freedom to find out how to be healthy, and obviously what you eat has got a massive bearing on our health. It's probably the biggest dial. Maybe.
Well, it is. We start as soil and sunlight, and we go back to being that. Because someone said to me, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, the things that your mother consumed started out in the ground, which is soil, and it grew from sunlight. If she had animals, they ate the plants. If it was plants, she ate, that was it." I said, "And when you're dead, you go back to the same thing. So you want to really pay attention to what you're doing in that part of the cycle."
Yeah. Yeah. So where was I going with that? Yeah, health and the power to choose what you put in your literally what we feed ourselves with is very much something we're free to do. And it kind of now, goodness me, let's hope we don't end up in gulags where we're force fed. But this is why I think also why health, I think, is such a great start for people who are in pursuit of peace, freedom, and abundance. It's a great area to flex your self-educational skills, and it's a great area in which we can flex our freedom, because, you know, nobody tells me to sit around on the couch playing computer games all day or do this or that. I am free in that respect, that I control my lifestyle choices. You know, I do what I want to do, and obviously within certain parameters. Everybody has to put food on the plate and so forth.
Well, when you talk about food as well, it's important to note that you have brain cells around your heart, your gut, and in your brain. And a lot of people that are having trouble thinking right now, it's because they've got big problems in their gut. And when they start to put that right, their mental and cognitive abilities will really start to sparkle again.
Excellent. Do you have any other insights that you've gleaned around that sort of gut health? If I were to say to you, great, Adrian, but how do I start? What's the first thing I should do? Or give me a couple of 2 or 3 things that I should do. Would you have any pointers to help people start with a healthy gut?
Yeah, be careful what you eat. And I mean, basically, what I would do is I would look for things that are alive. So, preferably raw vegetables and stuff like that. Fruits, I ate a lot of that. Drink distilled water because that's really the only thing that's going to pull the crap out of your system, unless you can get clean rainwater, which is also distilled. I wouldn't drink tap water. I wouldn't really drink bottled water unless I had no choice. I would be eating things like sauerkraut, making my own sauerkraut, kimchi, that kind of thing, because that's got loads of good bacteria and loads of vitamin C, vitamin K. And I wouldn't have any microwave food. And I would be particularly careful about anything that has to have a label for me to know what it is so I can eat it and prepare it. An apple looks like an apple, a carrot looks like a carrot. I know what to do with them.
Yeah.
If it's got some big fancy label and a list of ingredients, as long as my arm, I wouldn't go near it. In fact, anything man-made or man-packaged, I think is going to be a problem.
Yeah.
The other thing I would do is I would be in touch with the earth as much as I could. So earthing and grounding this on, so that's hooked into the circuit. I have a mat on my desk where my arms rest. That's also earthed. I have a sheet on the bed, which is earth. So I'm probably earthing 17, 18 hours a day. I go barefoot all in the summer. Lots of breathing exercises to get lots of oxygen in you. Pay attention to pH, which is a measure of your voltage. Any root canal filled teeth, ditch them out, which is a much bigger list than you asked for, and I could ramble on, so I'll shut up.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point to mention, your website and the book. Indeed, the website's called the same as the book, isn't it? Alternative Principles for Health.co.uk. Am I right?
No, .info.
.info. Beg your pardon.
Yeah, and it's basically what went on there. At one point when all this kicked off, and I decided, you know what, I can't stand this because people are going to get terrified. So I dumped everything in that site. And in many ways, it became toxic for the site because it wasn't just about health anymore. It was about other things as well as health. So recently I split that off to fortheloveoftruth.co.uk, which has the health and everything else on it, whereas the alternative principles for health.info purely has that. And the book, as you remember from what I said before, it's not a book for anyone else. It's my notes to me, but people seem to enjoy reading it. And on there's an audio of me reading the inner cover, the description, the dedication and the introduction, and that will give you a deeper look at me. And some of you will walk away when you listen to that because it sounds strange. But for those of you that resonate with, then the book might also resonate with you. I also started to do private consultations to do with health with people if they reach out to me and they are at a place where they really want to do something, then I'll certainly work with them and help them with that. But yeah, the website's a good place to go for that. And you can sign up for a weekly newsletter, which literally is me just giving you any new information I may have put on the blog or a video relating to health, just in case you don't get notifications elsewhere from it.
Wicked. Excellent. Well, that sounds like a good mention for everyone. That's a great resource and a good place to sort of underline this importance of health. And I would recommend any listeners, viewers, to maybe pick up the mantle of pursuing and ensuring your own health and longevity, because it really does dovetail so beautifully with the pursuit of freedom, truth.
Well, learn about the plants. I mean, that's the one thing I'm studying right now is the plants. All of the medicines used to come from the plants, and all of the plants still provide all the medicines that we need. Yeah. So become familiar with the plants. Learn how to grow some stuff yourself. It's not difficult.
Yeah.
Learn how to, I've only started doing that recently, but learn those things, because if you'll do those things, then this thing that has a grip on you, the system, all of a sudden, one of the fingers pops off and another finger. And as soon as you start to release a couple of the shackles, the whole thing becomes very weak and it can't hold you. So health and food are the two pivotal areas, I think, for people to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, on that note, an interview I did with Natasha Campbell McBride last year springs to mind. And I'm a big fan of her work, particularly with regards to gut health, as you were talking about earlier. But she has a view on foods where she sees plant foods as all of the medicines and the detox and many sorts of remedies available through plants. But she considers the animal fats and the animal foods as the sort of building blocks for the body, and the higher density of calorific energy and stuff in fats, the proteins, the essential amino acids.
So provided the animals haven't been tortured and abused on their way through, otherwise you'll be taking all that in.
Absolutely. So fundamentally, she divides foods into these two groups, plant foods and animal foods. And she challenges, and indeed, I'm not convinced by the vegetarian model. She suggests that a lot of people do well on vegetarian, vegan initially because they're taking the medicine plants, or which can be great, and it's great cleansing.
Yeah.
In the long term, she advocates, and others advocate, that the animal fats are and foods are also necessary. And there's a massive caveat in there, because I'm sure you could launch into something about this, but the modern animal food industry is horrific. And
yeah, just go and look up a film, Food Incorporated, Food Inc., and have a watch of that.
Yeah, there's a good few documentaries. A friend of mine sent me a link to a list of several documentaries that are pro-vegan, pro-vegetarian.
Yeah, well, I was vegan for 23 years, I think.
Yeah.
And it was only then that I started to really look into it and say, well, is this supportive of me, or do I need to now start to add a few things in?
Yeah.
And so I added in raw milk, because we have a dairy nearby that supplies that. I added in eggs and raw cheese. And that's as far as I go with the animal products. But that certainly was beneficial and helpful for me. But everyone needs to find their way. But you're right, sometimes just taking the medicine plants, even for a long period of time, is extremely useful.
Yeah.
And I think I'm still probably about 90% plant-based.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we on the small holding here, we have pigs, chickens, and geese, and we're going to get some goats. And animal welfare is really important, because a lot of people don't realize that if an animal is stressed at its time of slaughter, of course, it's, we release cortisol, adrenaline, and all of these other hormones. So do animals.
And the energetic impact on every cell as well, because that information field stays there.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to do is to consume any animal that's been in a state of terror during its last moments or hours. So there's a massive caveat with animal foods. They really need to be sourced properly. So I didn't want to let that one slip by, but I do think that they're an important part of the rebuilding of the body. But anyway, I'm aware of time, and don't want to keep you too long here, Adrian, but look, what a fantastic conversation. I could actually talk to you probably all day, actually.
Likewise. Well, we had a nice chat on the phone the other day that suddenly became an hour and a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe we can do this again at some stage. It would be a great pleasure. And let's watch the world as we've commented on today. Let's watch and see what happens, shall we, mate?
Well, I'd go further than that. I wouldn't necessarily watch it. I don't pay much attention to what goes on. I busy myself with, where do I want this to go in my life? What is it that I want to see? What is it that I want to experience? And I build that in my imagination, because I don't want to be a passenger on someone else's boat, lest it takes me to a port I don't want to go to.
Yeah.
So I do encourage people to think about what you want, and to think for yourself, and to work out that, and talk to other people, and share information, and really start to do that, and you will empower yourselves.
Yes. Fantastic. Well, marvelous message. You've told us your websites, haven't you? Is there anything we've forgotten? The Alternative Health Principles and
Alternative Principles for Health.info and forthelove-of-truth.co.uk. That's where you'll find all the other stuff, all the stuff on vaccines, germ theory, suzerain, common law. There's just ridiculous amounts of information on there. When I was migrating, I know the guy that owns the hosting company, and he said, well, just use a plugin. I went, it won't work. He said, of course it works. It can allow you to move up to 128 megs of data. And I went, yeah, it won't work. He said, well, how much information is in your directories there, and how much is in the in the database files? And I went, 4 gig. And he went, what? And I went, yeah, there's a lot of stuff there right now. It's going to take a while.
Excellent. Well, that's a fantastic resource, and of course your YouTube channel, which there'll be a link to.
Yeah, which actually again, there'll be on the websites. There's a link to the other channels, because I took 160 videos off YouTube when they gave me a strike, which I'm now down to 0 strikes now, I think.
Excellent.
But I took them off, and I placed the more contentious ones elsewhere.
Excellent. Well, what other platforms are you on at the moment, Adrian?
BitChute, Library, and Brighton.
Right. Yeah. Good stuff. Yeah, I keep getting videos taken down retrospectively as well. I must go back and do what you said, because you mentioned that to me a few weeks ago. And
well, they pulled 17. I got a strike, and then I got another strike, and one of the strikes they gave me was for putting up a video saying I just had a strike. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that's naughty of me. Slap wrist.
I learned not to do that from watching your video, I think.
Yeah.
Or was it you telling me about that? Anyway.
Yeah. So, but basically, pull the stuff down if you want to keep, because my view is you want to keep the interaction going with the people. right? So we can be as flexible as we want. It's their system. We're messing in an area that we really shouldn't be messing with, because we're a fly in the ointment. We're a boil on the skin,
Yeah.
you know. And so we've got to be a little cautious how we approach it. But at the same time, if we do it right, Nigel, like I said before, be flexible, be unpredictable,
Unpredictable.
do all sorts of crazy shit, like the pattern interrupts and the stuff I showed you. If you learn how to do stuff like that, this becomes a really, fun's not the right word. It can have some amusement in amongst all the serious stuff.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Adrian, and thank you everybody.
Likewise, I appreciate it.
Thank you everybody for listening and for watching. Do check out the website lawfulrebel.com. There's stacks more on there. All the show notes will be linked on the blog page associated with this podcast, so do check that out as well. And thank you so much, Adrian, for sharing your perspective and everything today, and hopefully we can talk to you again very soon.
Yeah, well, likewise, mate. And I've said this to a few other people. Please keep doing what you do. You don't have many views right now, and I know why that is. It's because you are hitting way too close to the mark. Keep at it, because the world needs it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. Excellent.
All right.
Nice one.
Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see.